Good afternoon. Welcome back to AMFM247.com, Cool Your Heels with Lillian-Cauldwell and Passionate World Radio Network, the world in your hands. And today our special guest on Cool Your Heels is John West, who, with a partner, developed an app called Waste Not. And we're going to also be discussing about the food wastage that is worldwide. So good afternoon, John. How are you today?
Well, hi, Lillian. Thanks for having me.
Well, I am delighted to have you. I think that we have a lot of food, as you probably know, that goes to waste, not only from restaurants, but also from the supermarkets. So what motivated you and your partner to develop an app called Waste Not?
Well, it is a huge problem, like you said, and there's a number of people working on different aspects globally trying to solve food waste. What motivated me was seeing the food wasted in my own home. And I'm a cook at home. I spend a lot of time focusing on getting good ingredients. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so we have great products out here. The worst kind of waste for me is when you spend the time and money to get good ingredients home, ingredients that have gone through the supply chain, all the cost associated with that, to get to the end user in good condition, and then that food is wasted in your home. So that was happening in my home, and I wanted a tool to try to reduce my own food waste. And it really was a, act local approach to what is a global problem. And if we can limit food waste in our home using technology, we thought we'd try to tackle that with an app. So that's what WasteNet is. It's basically an inventory management tool for for households and for the home cook to know what you have on hand, make sure that you are using what you've purchased, and that you're aware of products that are going to spoil in your home before they do, so you can preserve them or use them.
I think it's an excellent idea. I know personally that even with my husband and I'm very vigilant about it, but when you clean out a refrigerator every 6 months or so, you find that you throw away things that you have as leftovers that have gone moldy in the refrigerator or have just gone bad in the refrigerator. And if you had to sit down with a calculator, I think people would find, to their horror, they throw out maybe between $50 and $100 every day.
I would say for the average household, it's in the hundreds of dollars, if not thousands a year. And the environmental impact associated with creating that food, a lot of it goes into landfills if it's not used. So using the food that we get home or preserving it, knowing that it's going to spoil before it does, and using techniques, building a community that is sharing ideas around preservation techniques, recipes, and really committed to reducing food waste, helping each other have that as a goal and have it top of mind is another aspect of the app.
Now, I know that through the catalogs that come home, that there are certain products that have or were invented to help extend the longevity of, say, things in the refrigerator as opposed to things that you put into your cabinets or pantry. So we got those green bags, and they do extend the life of the food that you put in the refrigerator as long as you keep them tightly closed. But the problem is you take it for granted that it's going to extend it, therefore you ignore it, and so the food goes bad anyway. So what kind of methods, in addition to your app, can a person take to not waste the food that they bring back from the grocery store?
Well, the app is a tool to remind you what you have and ways to preserve it. It depends what you buy, but everything from drying food, making preserves, whether it's pickles, fermentations, or jellies, jams, salting and drying food. Any way that you can take what you have before it spoils, can it, freeze it, to extend the life and preserve the food. And then again, the WasteNet app would help remind you what you have in your inventory, even if it's already been preserved, so that when you go to the store, if there's something you need, maybe you have tomatoes that you canned 3 months ago, and instead of buying a new jar of tomatoes to make pasta sauce, you know that you have that on hand, and you have that inventory with you as you're shopping. I think the communal aspect is important too, though, where ultimately, after we get launched and have a base of users, those users will share techniques and stories and really support each other in their effort to reduce food waste at home. So that communal aspect is really powerful once we build the community around using the app.
I would think that having the app and building it among the community could also call for once a week where people can bring whatever they have left over in their refrigerators or left over in their pantry and actually prepare a meal for the entire community.
That would be a great outcome. I live in a condo building with 64 units, and we have a common area. Having something like a weekly or every couple of weeks having an event that people could share food through a community that was built based on the app would really be a great outcome.
Because I think that people have a tendency to buy a little bit more than they can consume in 1 week. Now, I just buy for the week, and if it's not on the list, I don't get it. But then I also do a good inventory of what I have in the refrigerator and or the freezer or the pantry before I go out. So with this app, then, it absolutely regulates how much food. It will tell you how much food you have. Do you have to put information into the app itself for it to work correctly? How does it work?
Yeah, so that building the inventory is the key step. And there's a couple things there. We're working on different entry methods. The most time-consuming and demanding of the user is the manual entry, and you'll still have to do that, for instance, if you go to a farmer's market. But the goal would be to have partnerships with grocers and other companies that will allow us to, whether it's scanning receipts or having a partnership that directly inputs your inventory after you purchase it into the app.
So once you put the inventory into the app, then what it does is keep track of how much that particular food you have, the amount.
The amount and the typical expiration for that food. So it'll send spoiler alerts when a product typically would get close to spoiling, and you can also enter the actual expiration date if you have that. One thing that I found also at home, if I need, for instance, a bunch of cilantro or parsley, maybe I only need a couple tablespoons for a recipe. It seems like you always have to buy more than would be needed for a single recipe, and suggesting other ways to use what you have is another aspect of the app. So if you have cilantro on hand and you've already made a salsa, you would use the app then. You might be able to use that for a ceviche or a different dish later in the week. Just continuing to try to use every bit of everything that we purchase and not let it spoil.
It almost seems to make sense to me that you would start a communal type of herbal garden where there are some herbs you can actually grow all year round, and then there's some that you have to keep on planting to get. And I know that we have established what I call a kitchen herbal garden that I just grow inside. And if somebody else wants to take something from it, they can, because I know that when you go over to places like Costco, for example, or Sam's, you can buy those really, really large containers. But those containers are meant for people who have restaurants or really out cafeterias and schools or institutions or companies where they'll be using up that type of food almost immediately. Whereas if somebody from the home buys it, they have it for the next 5 years.
It is. It's an important aspect of the storage and preservation of the food we buy. Vacuum sealers are great for that. Buying in bulk has its efficiencies, but it's not efficient if the food goes to waste. So having the proper storage for large quantities of food is really important.
So would you say you would need to almost re-educate the buyer, the consumer who's going out to buy their food, to re-educate them as how they really should be shopping and marketing for their food?
I think that's something that would happen naturally once people realize the impact and the scale of the food waste problem. If you really get committed to it, it's something that you change your behavior to address. And I think the app helps with that. It'll keep it front of mind, but it is, like you're saying, a change in lifestyle and a change in perception of how we look at food that comes into our home, and really being stewards of that, because we know that there are far-reaching impacts of our behavior in our homes, whether it's, again, the environmental cost and the resources that go into producing and getting the food to us, or on the other side, the amount of wasted food that goes into landfills.
So would you think that something like your app should be taught probably in junior high or high school, where the kids, there's a lot of food cafeterias, and we've all gone to school and we've all eaten at the school cafeteria, and I've often wondered what happens to all that food that's left over. I mean, if you go to some of this, I live in a senior community center, and I know that they cook to order, but they also pre-cook stuff out for people who want to pick up the food and take it back to their condo, for example. But there's always a lot of food left over. Can you develop an app that can actually tell people where they can go and take this extra food rather than just throwing it out?
There are some apps that are working on that. Ours doesn't specifically do that. There are food share programs. There are food banks that accept food donations. The commercial, whether it's grocery stores, restaurants like you're talking about, the commercial aspect of food waste is huge, and there are several companies working to incentivize, whether it's, again, restaurants or the commercial food purveyors to reduce their waste. The app that we created is more for the individual household, but it does reinforce, you were saying to teach this in schools, it reinforces that behavior to keep people aware of the problem and do what we can individually to reduce our contribution to the problem. There used to be the home economics classes and that taught in school. I don't think they are anymore, but kind of a back to the basics approach I think would be really helpful.
I think so too. In fact, I think you should try to create some kind of game to go with the app that a kid can play, where a kid can make decisions where they're going to the school cafeteria, there's some food there and stuff, and at the end of the day they have all this food left over. What will you do with it? Or where would it go? I mean, when we were kids growing up in the 50s, we were threatened, if you don't eat everything in your plate, we'll send it to a kid in Africa. Well, we more or less figured that out. There was no way that was going to happen. But there certainly is a lot of food that is just left. And I know when I speak to some of the people who have lived in the streets, they tell me they go through the garbage cans from the backs of stores and restaurants, and they say you'd be surprised what we pick out of those places.
It's true, and it's also surprising what doesn't even make it to the market, because it doesn't appear to be the best product, where it's, B grade or what people are calling ugly food these days. And there are now companies that you can buy that food. It's deeply discounted, equally as nutritious, equally expensive to produce. But you can. There are companies that are working on getting that food out there. I think the gameplay idea is a great one. We have rewards, and you become what's called a waste warrior by using the Waste Not app, and your stats and your impact and how much money you've saved, and we try to incentivize people through that. But I think making it fun through an interactive game would be a great idea, and also to get young people involved.
I think that you guys ought to try it, and I'll be more than happy to, be an advisor or something, because I have found that, and actually it's the kids you're really trying to change their habits before they really get formed. I mean, a lot of adults, let's face it, we're sort of hopeless in some things. You can't teach an adult new tricks. I'm sure you've heard that many times. And it's somewhat true. People don't like to change. They're afraid. or they don't like to be told what they need to do, that they're kings and queens of their own food kingdom. So could you break down, to give our audience an idea, could you break down the cost of one or two items so people understand what you're talking about?
What kind of items do you mean?
Well, usually when people go marketing, they buy something. Let's talk about the cost of food coming out of the produce section.
Well, produce tends to be, it's funny, it depends on the product, but the more seasonal and local you can buy, it seems like that's where the best deals are. Excuse me, and the app, the goal of the app, ultimately through partnerships, would also be to encourage people to buy what's local and in season. It cuts down the cost of transportation and getting the food, whether it's coming from Mexico, Central or South America, often to the U.S. If you can buy local, a lot of that cost is reduced. I find the most delicate fruits are the most expensive, whether it's peaches, berries that don't last. So again, that layering over that cost, you've got something that is delicate, that costs more to get to the end user in good condition. When we get it to our homes, it's even more important then that we either use it while it's fresh or find a way to extend its life so that we can benefit from all the cost and the nutrition that's available.
All right, so let's start with the state of Washington. You live in Seattle. What are some of the local produce that you should be able to buy in the state of Washington without having it shipped in? Because if you have stuff shipped in, whether it comes by truck or train or plane, you have an extra cost with the refrigeration and transportation costs, right?
Right, and we're lucky in Washington. We're a huge producer of produce. We have a lot of family farms that produce a pretty diverse variety of foods. Eastern Washington is a wonderful agricultural climate, one of the largest apple producers in the country, of course. So we're lucky because we have really a food culture and a lot of producers that are committed to producing good products locally. So if you're committed to eating locally and seasonally, there is really a great variety that we have access to here.
Okay, so you don't have to worry. Now, when I was growing up in New York, we got an orange, and the only time we had an orange was Christmas time because you had to ship it in from Florida. So if people were to eat locally in a place not as temperate as Washington State, which it is compared to, say, Montana or the Dakotas, if you were eating locally, then you would eat only the products that state can produce.
Well, you try to, and yeah, I mean it is difficult. Like citrus is a good example. There's not citrus grown in Washington, so our lemons and oranges are coming from Florida, California, Mexico. It's another way to reduce your environmental impact of food consumption. Just being as committed as possible. If you're really going to do it, yes, there would be things you'd have to eliminate, like citrus in most of the states.
I would think citrus, and I also think that there are a lot of things that you can buy regionally that you cannot buy out in addition to the citrus. Now, for example, if we took the triangle, which would be what? New York, New Jersey, I guess we'll include Pennsylvania in there. I know that New York has its own apple crop, so you can always make hard cider. I know you can make beer wherever you are, and for that matter, so can with wine. So in that respect, most men will be okay. Okay? They have to have something to drink, But then if you're looking at some of the other things, well, kids just like anything fried most of the time, so that's potatoes. So they'll be okay with that. And they do have poultry. There are dairy farms in upstate New York, so they're okay with the milk and dairy products. So what is the biggest thing that stores have to import if they're up north from other regions? Basically, let's see, that's the berries when they're out of season. It's tomatoes. Well, actually, a lot of the produce you can't grow during the winter up north.
Yeah, it's a lot of the produce, and I think a good habit is just talking to your grocer, making sure that you shop at places that the grocers are willing to talk to you about where the food is coming from so that you know. When you go into a produce section in a grocery store, there's products coming from all over the country, all over the world.
All over the world.
Right. So having somebody that is knowledgeable about where their food is coming from, willing to discuss it with you so that we can all do our best, be informed, and do our best to eat locally. It's not 100% eating local is really a difficult commitment, but to the extent we can be informed, understand where our food is coming from, and make decisions based on that, that's the best we can do.
Yeah, and it's difficult when things have changed to where it's an open market, whatever you want, you can pretty much find.
It's true, and that goes back to the supply chain. It is really a global market that comes to our grocery stores.
Well, they can fly in a lot of things too.
Of course, agreed. We have great seafood here in the Pacific Northwest, but we get a lot of our seafood from the Atlantic also. And I'm always asking my fishmongers, where is this coming from? Is it local? I'll often buy the fish and the seafood from the Atlantic side. It helps to know, and then you can also gauge the cost associated with that, with getting that product across the country.
You know what you may want to try with your app too is when I was going to school, I had a English professor who told us we had to write up an ad using just verbs. No adverbs, no adjectives, no passives, just verbs. And it took me a long time to write that ad because you don't consciously think of how often you use adverbs and adjectives to help you present your ideas in your writing. So instead of just using all action verbs, you can make it to where you're just using the products that you can find locally grown and killed, for meat if you're a big meat eater, and try to do that for a week and see what happens.
That's a good way to start. Just make it a weekly challenge. Make it maybe a month challenge to use everything that you buy that month and really try to throw, except for trimmings and scraps, try to throw nothing away and see how that changes your shopping habit. When you're in the store, really have that mindset of, will I use this within the week or a couple weeks or even up to a month, and make that a challenge.
Yep.
I think that's a great idea.
I think that would be a good way to get people to start opening their eyes to what is good for them not to waste food. And you can certainly use that on a child, saying you have 5 or 4 basic food groups you eat from every single day. And this is the list of food you can pick from to have from your meal. And with your parents' help, you can put together a meal.
Yeah, and really building that awareness, like you're saying, at a young age. One thing with building the inventory on the app, which will take some time up front, especially somebody like me who has a pretty full pantry, but just going through the pantry and entering everything in there so that when we're shopping, I often don't know, what's in the back of the pantry in a can or a box, and I rebuy something that is in my pantry and getting close to expiration. So having that initial inventory, taking the time to create it, would also build a commitment to using that, knowing what's in there and going through the products that we already have before they spoil.
I think that, and also that the app can actually do the basics of what you would need in any pantry in order to cook with your food. There are certain items that you use every single day, thousands of times. They're not specialty items, like, for example, milk and juice and bread and cheese.
Flour and sugar, just the basics.
Yes, right. Those are just the basics, and then build up from that and add the rest that go to complement what you need to bring out, for example, the proper nutrition, to bring out the calcium and the iron, stuff that your body needs in order to be fueled efficiently so you can then go out and do whatever you need to do. And I think that would be another way to expand your app, because basically when kids leave home, they start off, well, with nothing. I didn't start with anything. I had to start from getting my basics and then building from my basics. And from there were certain things you did not need to buy all the time. For example, herbs, especially if they're dried. You have them for a while. I inherited from my mother some of her spices because she didn't use, they were specialty spices, like cardamom, for example. You don't use that very much. Or saffron. You have that around almost forever. So there are things that you need to add for what you're going to use occasionally, but you're not going to use every single day.
It's true, and part of that, part of the fun of having a community around waste, a couple of things. One, when you're out shopping, if you have your inventory in your hand and you can say, okay, wait a minute, I do have saffron. Maybe I'll make a piece of fish with the saffron, and I have dried beans. I didn't realize that. Maybe I'll make a side dish with the fish, and so you really think creatively. Secondarily, the community aspect you were talking about in sharing, something like saffron is expensive, or cardamom that you don't use very often. Rather than going and buying a new jar of cardamom if you need it, maybe you're able to interact with your neighbor through the communal aspect of the app and say, okay, I need 2 pods of cardamom, and of course, that's probably all I use all year, so I could spare the cardamom and pass them to my neighbor.
Absolutely. I think it teaches people how to rethink, create new airways, if you want to put it that way, or passageways, so that their thinking can be redirected. So instead of saying, well, I'll just throw it out. I mean, my son does it. They don't have any leftovers in their house. They just throw away the food, which really makes me very angry because it's food. I mean, his wife went to the time and effort of pulling all the ingredients out and making this really great dinner and then just saying, well, we don't eat leftovers. Wouldn't it be nicer if you invited somebody over to eat the leftover rather than just throwing it out because it was an easy thing to do?
Sure, or just give them to a member of your community, maybe an older member that doesn't cook as much for themselves.
Exactly. So I think that your app can be used more for people also to reassess and reprogram their thinking of how they handle the extra food that they don't need.
I hope so. I mean, building an awareness is one of our goals. And like you're saying, I mean, when you think about this, and it is top of mind, you tend to change your behavior and become more conscientious about what you're buying and how you're treating it once you get home. That is a goal. The individual behavior is what we hope to change, but just having the awareness of it out there in the community is a benefit also. I
think your app will make them stop and think, if nothing else.
We certainly hope so.
And that's what you want. John, please tell everybody where they can find your apps, where they can find you and your partner on the World Wide Web, your website, all that great information, how they can contact you.
Sure. Check out our website. It's wastenotapp.com, wastenotapp.com. Check out the info there. Please sign up for email alerts. We've launched an Indiegogo campaign to complete the app, so please check us out there. Contribute if you're able. Share the information and the crowdfunding campaign with your friends. We are trying to make a positive impact and appreciate everybody's contribution to making it happen.
Terrific. Well, that's about wraps it up, ladies and gentlemen and children of all ages. You can hear this interview with John all over again with the Waste Not app over at amfm247.com every Tuesday evening from 8 to 9 p.m. You can find it at PassionateWorldRadioNetwork.com under Cool Your Heels or Lillian-Cauldwell. You can find it at Facebook.com/Passionate World Radio, Twitter.com PWR Talk Radio. You can also find it on iTunes.com/Cool Your Heels, and yes, all the other great social networks and directories that are out there. Before you go away and stray, Ursa Pound had this to say in 1934, literature is news that stays news. Thank you all very much for listening. Please go and check John's app out. We need to do something about food wastage better now than later. Thank you all very much for listening. And remember, please keep listening. Thank you.